want to welcome to the show Shayne Currie, NZME's editor-at-large. I nearly said New Zealand Me there, Shayne. NZME's editor-at-large, former editor of the Herald. That's correct, isn't it? The New Zealand Herald?
That's right, Pat. Yes.
Yeah.
I was editor, great 5 years of my career as editor.
I was going to ask you as well about what that title means. Editor-at-large sounds like someone who spends a lot of time speaking to people in a cafe, kind of off doing things in different parts of the country. You're at large, you know?
Yeah, there's a little bit of that. Certainly trying to build up my contact base again. But so I'm only 3 months into the role, so you've got the training wheels on.
Yeah, no, I've actually got the press release right here for when you took over in March of 2023. It says a role that will combine frontline journalism, strategic content initiatives across NZME's digital, audio and print platforms. So with this legislation, this discussion document around legislation, you look like you have a finger in kind of every pie to have a talk to about what's going on. So thanks for giving us some time today.
No problem at all. It's great to be here.
The document in and of itself is called Safer Online Services and Media Platforms Discussion Document. So it's a discussion document, a white paper or something like that, a starting point to start this chat. And I guess I wanted to start because traditional media is heavily regulated. Although my experience is in radio, so I'm across the BSA. It's a pretty toothless dog. It is a group that can go, oh, you've been naughty such and such on the radio, now apologise, but it doesn't seem to be able to impose fines or have any kind of sort of quote unquote punishments for it. With this new regulation, seems to be a little bit more heavy-handed in that it's proposed to have authority to do that kind of stuff. But we're looking at social media, and I guess we're looking, not that many people have talked about this, but where we're sitting right now is like internet media as well. So what we do right now, we don't have any regulations over us. Many of these new internet platforms don't have any regulations over them. So the way I think about this is social media and internet type broadcast media companies as well. Before we look in actually what it says, do you think social media and groups like us, and I guess like the platform and that kind of thing, need to have some kind of regulatory body above them should they cross a line?
I think just to rewind a couple of your points there, firstly, Pat, just on the BSA for starters.
Yep.
No, the BSA definitely has the power to impose heavy fines.
Okay.
And that has happened in over the course of history with various cases. Not often, I must say. I think one of the reasons for this discussion document is there is a fair bit of confusion in the market and amongst consumers about who they can complain to. If, say, for instance, the Herald gets something wrong or News Talk ZB gets something wrong. In the case of digital traditional media platforms such as nzherald.co or Stuff, it's still the Media Council. And the Media Council's been around for many decades and was looking after print publications initially. Whereas yes, you're right, for the broadcasters, the traditional broadcasters, terrestrial broadcasters, Television New Zealand and so forth, it is the Broadcasting Standards Authority. And they are different bodies. And then there's about 3 or 4 other different bodies that, for instance, the Advertising Standards Authority. But to bring back to your question around do other platforms need to be regulated, I'd say, and this is the feedback I've received and, informing my own kind of view and perception of it all as well, social media in particular, there does need to be, I think, a closer look at the regulations or lack of them that govern social media. I do think that platforms such as your own, and I spoke to Sean Plunkett about this last week, such as the platform, there are still laws in New Zealand which govern what you can and can't say. I mean, we still have the Defamation Act. There's the Harmful Digital Communications Act. So there is actually legislation in place for platforms, not just for you guys and for the Herald, but, for a lot of what we've seen in the last decade, I guess, the startups. But it is really where the Internal Affairs has directed a lot of attention in this discussion paper is around social media in particular. And this is a massive beast of a kind of a task ahead of them, I guess, to try and rein in individuals who, it's a bit of the Wild West on some parts of social media in particular.
Sometimes I think about those regulatory bodies, and look, to be honest, I wasn't aware that, maybe because I've never experienced the BSA ever imposing a fine. They normally say, there's a process to go through, which is, let's say it was News Talk ZB, which is where I used to work. You complain to News Talk ZB. If the response they give you is not to your satisfaction, you then go to the BSA, and then they decide whether there's some kind of action. I've never heard of anyone getting fined, but then again, I obviously not in that world, so to speak. But it seems that the regulatory bodies aren't necessarily so much about the legal side of things like defamation, but they're kind of about this is how we do it. Like Sean Plunkett's a good example. He had a guest on a wee while ago that we featured, Suze Wilson, and he doorstopped her. We phoned her out of the blue and put her on the radio, and she didn't know, the internet, and she didn't know she was being talked to on the radio. For the BSA, that would be a clear breach for a radio station, but for the internet, it's not. There's nothing illegal going on, but it's almost like some of these regulatory bodies are a bit like, hey, that's not cricket. That's not how we've agreed to do things. Is that the difference between sort of the regulation and the laws as we're looking at it?
That's right. I guess there's different levels, right? So last year I spent about 2 or 3 months of 2022 in my old role as editor-in-chief here at NZME, developing an entirely new editorial code of conduct with the newsroom, and that's available publicly on our website. But previously, I think we had 2 pages of kind of protocols. That now extends to, I think, around a dozen pages. It is very extensive and recognises the modern world we live in. We hadn't updated our own code probably for about a decade, and so that was long overdue. So you have that level within each newsroom in New Zealand, I guess, of traditional media. And then the regulatory bodies, whether that's self-regulators such as the Media Council or the Broadcasting Standards Authority, they have another set of code and principles very similar to the ones that the newsrooms operate under anyway. But the industries have all agreed to those codes. And so that does give any complainants, documents upon which to base their complaints or concerns. The example you just used is a classic example. We have to be really clear, unless there are exceptional circumstances, that you identify yourself as either a reporter or a broadcaster for your given organisation. There might be occasions, and this is when you're dealing with, for instance, fraudsters or people who have been accused of ripping people off, where you are doorstopping people and trying to get comment really, really quickly, but 99.9% of cases you're identifying yourself up front. So it's really important that obviously our newsrooms abide by those codes and our reporters are aware of them, but also for the public to know that there is a backstop, to know that actually I'm not satisfied with the way they've handled this complaint. I can go to the Media Council. In the Media Council's case, that is dominated by members of the public. So there are industry representatives on it, but for every complaint they hear, there is a majority independent members of the public who consider it.
Sounds like it should be like a reality TV show. The Media Council, dun, dun, dun. You could be looking at all the cases. You could be broadcasting it. Now, you kind of referenced there sort of self-regulation. I want to go straight to the proposed document, the discussion document, because I've been listening to the Free Speech Union over the last week or so, and the Free Speech Union seem to think the sky is falling. My personal perspective, they seem to be thinking that this is the worst thing to happen to free speech since the history of the world, and I believe have kind of inaccurately labelled this document as, so what they're saying is if you see something nasty on the internet, we can try and help you get it taken down, which is completely not what the document said. That, in fact, that's almost a quote from one of the interviews I heard talking about nasty things on the internet. One of the things I don't think has been talked about very much is, as I read this document, the discussion document, step 1 to a process, thinking that in Australia this process has still been going on for 2 years, so it's not going to be a fast process, is that the document is saying industry X, whichever one it is, you guys come up with the proposal, you guys come up with the code of conduct, and then when you don't, or when someone or you don't adhere to it, or someone wants to complain that you've breached it, that then comes to us. I'll just read out this one paragraph. Platforms will need to have operating policies in place to meet these requirements, the requirements that they've talked about previously, but will have the flexibility to decide how to achieve them. Industry groups will develop the codes and with input from and approved by the regulator. This approach leaves editorial decision making in the hands of the platforms, while ensuring users have a greater transparency and protection. As you read the document, is that how you see it? Stage 1, step 1, they're saying you guys come up with a code of practice, code of conduct. When there's a breach, in theory, if this was to go through, they then would complain to us.
Yeah, so the document's a little, that was a snapshot, as it was titled, of the document. The document's, I think, around 100 odd pages long, and I went through it just before it was released under embargo. And there are other points in there which says the regulator will, if it's not happy with the code of conduct that said industry has come up with, they
Yep.
will step in necessarily.
Well,
Now, what they
I
have,
guess it does say that. I guess it does say that in this because it says with input and approval from the regulator. So it's basically the industry comes up with a code. If the
yep,
regulator's not happy, they can change or input it. But it seems to be a collaborative effort started by the industry.
that's right. And then and they would still leave the handling of the initial complaint with, say, the Media Council.
Right.
This is what the indication I'm getting. And then if things, and then there's a right of appeal to the regulator on this. So I guess it becomes a three-step process. You complain initially to the media organisation,
Yep.
we're talking, and then to the Media Council. And if you're still not happy, you can go to this what I initially termed as the superpower. In
Right.
terms of the arguments around the free speech union and what they're saying, where they've come at it from is around they have claimed and asserted that this does impact on freedom of expression, that there's already laws in place to govern that. I guess what it will come down to in that respect of any new legislation is how do you define harm? And this is really, I mean, at the heart of it all, this is a good, the proposal. Everyone's got the best interests at heart of kids, of people who use the internet, making sure we're safe, right?
Yeah.
But where the Free Speech Union, one of their points was that how do you define harm? There has to be, and some of the mainstream media organisations picked up on this as well, that there has to be an objective classification of harm. If it's subjective, we fall into all sorts of difficulties because then it really does come down to you have a regulator who's opining on cases where natural biases might be coming into decision making. So, and I guess that's where the hate speech laws came unstuck most recently. It's just so hard to define, what one person's harm is compared to
Yeah.
another. There's a very big
Well,
grey area.
and we would agree with that completely, 100% in this. It just feels like not that this interview is about the Free Speech Union, but the Free Speech Union literally came out saying, when Sean Plunkett said to them the other day, is there imprisonment involved? And they literally said, well, they're too smart to put that into the document. I have no problems debating what should and shouldn't go in. What I have a problem with the Free Speech Union is, not that I want to talk about them, is that I believe they're beating up and scaremongering, saying, we know what they're really trying to do, people. We know what they're really trying to do. Whereas yourself and Anna Rafiti Connell on News Hub called this document a great start.
Yeah, I think it's a long overdue discussion, particularly as I say around social media. I do believe that for so long, and I think I said this on The Nation the other morning, is that for so long the big social media giants haven't come to the table.
Yeah.
I think I do think that with producing content or distributing content comes a great deal of obligation on you for responsibilities. Now, look, the social media giants themselves. I spoke to Meta briefly last week. They've got their own independent code, which has been drawn up in the last 12 months or so. But you would think that we're almost 2 decades in now, aren't we, to the likes of Facebook and so forth, that something a bit more concrete might have been in place before now. And that's the other point, Pat, is around this whole discussion document. It is a great start because our current laws, the Broadcasting Act and so forth, these were drafted well before any advent of social media in particular. And so it is long overdue in that respect. I guess the concern, the Free Speech Union were out in one sort of hemisphere with their concerns. I think the mainstream media's kind of focus was a little more there was concern and there was caution, but that was more around just making sure the principles of free press weren't.
Well, yeah, could you nutshell that for me? And I know this is a discussion document, so I'm not going to ask you to do what I feel like the Free Speech Union is doing, which are they saying, this is what it really means. We're not going to do that. But following this discussion through to its nth degree, like theoretically, how could the proposal, if made law, affect freedom of the press? Like, what's the worst case scenario that this kind of thing could do to impact groups like yourself?
Yeah, they say, they were really clear that they themselves know that they're in territory here where they have to have a really careful balance. I think Suzanne Doig made that point in her press release, that the last thing they want to do is impact on a negative impact on free speech and freedom of the press. And they're really important principles of democracy, as we know. I guess some of the media businesses came from, the likes of Stuff and TVNZ, RNZ, they all said that that's fine. We're already heavily regulated. The last thing we need is more cost put upon us, which impacts on, now this is literal cost,
Yep.
um, uh, because that impacts on content gathering, news gathering, and that plays out in terms of resourcing and newsrooms. So, they were quite specific around some of these areas, and made good points in those areas that the system right now for them, and as far as they're concerned, now obviously the public will be the judge of this, but that there are already safeguards in place for the public to raise concerns and have their concerns considered, both under the law and through the various industry bodies that look after it. I must say, a couple of them admitted it is messy. You have a BSA, you have a media council, you have an advertising standards authority. I think there could be a tidy up in that area as part of this, so just to make it super clear to consumers where they head to if they have concerns.
It sounds like you need a bit of a gold card. When Winston Peters brought the gold card out, basically all he did was bring all the other like bonus cards for retirees under one title. Here's the obvious question I think to ask on the flip side of this. What if we do nothing? Like what if, and I'm not saying this is what the free speech union would want, but what if it's a group that goes, everything's fine right now, we should do nothing, freedom of speech, yada, 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 yada. What if we do nothing? Are there downsides? What are the downsides of that?
Yeah, so if you, the example that was raised in the document, and a really important example, was that recently TikTok, for instance, there was a suicide video being screened on TikTok. We know what happened during the mosque attacks in Christchurch. Whether the video was live streamed to the public. That's the kind of harmful, damaging, horrific content that needs to be sorted out.
But this wouldn't stop that. And this is not going to stop someone getting on a live stream with a gun. It might stop some of what happens after it, but it wouldn't stop the event from happening, would it?
Well, it would, at the very least, with Facebook, who, very clearly in the years after Christchurch have put in more safeguards as a result. But it would actually be, I guess, rather than to hate using a cliche, an ambulance at the foot of the cliff, but actually, having the barrier at the top so that Facebook's actually on guard all the time to ensure that their technology doesn't allow that kind of material to be screened live.
So because of the regulations, all the new laws, whatever they're going to be, legislations, Facebook now has basically a duty of care to attempt as much as it can to keep that off rather than reacting to it when it comes on.
Correct. And very similar to the, the regulation that's already imposed or that the mainstream media companies already comply to. It's really, as I say, bringing Facebook's Meta, Twitter and TikTok to the table, and goodness knows who is coming in the future. And interestingly, even this document, you could argue, is a little bit, it's just being produced, right? After 2 or 3 years of consultation with the industry and with the public. But when we started consultation on it a couple of years ago, AI wasn't even really considered.
Yeah, true.
I almost feel, I searched the term artificial intelligence and AI on the document. I think there's about 4 references to it in this 100-page kind of document. There's going to need to be some serious thinking about just where AI takes us in terms of regulation and content as well.
Look, I think, I'm sure you've seen it. Donald Trump put out that advert. It's very funny, but the day after DeSantis made his ridiculous Twitter announcement with all the fake voices on the Twitter feed, and they're all AI voices, and most of them, if you weren't paying real attention to, you'd go, that sounds like Elon Musk. Yeah, so it's almost like it's out of date before, because this will take a couple of years to sort out. So they need to start adding the AI stuff in now to then be fit to purpose in 2 years from now.
That's right, or at least having legislation, I guess, that captures future platforms and future technology that we don't even know has been invented yet.
Yeah, true. Oh my God. Hey, look, thank you for the chat. I want to ask you one more question. It's actually kind of like a side note. It's just something I'm interested in, because there's been regulations on and laws made around social media in Australia to do with the amount of money they make off content that's locally produced. And you've talked a little bit about this, but because I'm a moron, right, I don't really understand it, Shayne, I kind of want to understand if I, as a person, shares a very well-written Simon Wilson document. I won't be there because it's behind the paywall. Let's say a document from the New Zealand Herald on my Facebook page. how is Facebook responsible for making money off that, of something I've done as a customer to share a bit of content I want to share? Do you know what I mean? I'm like trying to figure that out how, but this is my little thing. Cause I thought this is a very strange thing for me to say, but if I buy a pair of Nikes and then I run in a race where I win $1 million, Nike doesn't see anything for that, even though I've purchased their product. I was wondering where the connection between Meta making money off Herald or ZB content versus me as a person choosing to upload that. I'm looking for some kind of connection there to understand it myself. How do you answer that?
Yeah, I guess, the likes of Facebook in particular, but also Google News, they've created products like Google News and like the Facebook news feed that are solely drawing content from mainstream publishers who spend a hell of a lot of money.
So they're
Journalism isn't
scraping.
cheap, right?
Are they scraping? Are they? They're scraping and uploading?
In some cases they are. And look, in some cases they are, in terms of Google, of course. But in terms of, yes, I acknowledge that we're also responsible for putting our content out on these places. We need to be where audiences are in order for our business model to survive. But what we were simply asking, and still asking in respect of this, and they have come to the table, we've obviously announced publicly that we've done deals already with Meta and with Google, where they've recognised that there is value to the material and content journalism that we produce. And this is probably a very, very tiny percentage of the overall revenue they make, both in New Zealand and across the world, that actually, part of their business model survives on the fact that they're drawing upon journalism that we produce.
Got it. It also makes more sense with the scraping, because that's actually not an individual saying, I like this article from Stuff or Herald, or listen to this thing from Mike Hosking. It's actually, if they're basically grabbing the information, putting it into their news feeds, especially Google, that I get that. That's a lot clearer. Yeah,
that's right. And I think, and that's another challenge coming up with AI as well. We know that AI is scraping news websites across the world, including ours and including others in New Zealand, in order to build up that natural language processing ability.
Yeah, right. Fascinating. Hey, Shayne Currie, who is NZME's editor at large, thanks so much for joining us today. Really appreciate you giving us some time.
Thanks, Pat.